It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
All right. Well,
We,
you mean I'll
Alex,
just
it's
take it.
Thursday.
Yeah, it's Thursday. We're doing well. It's just us two this time.
Yep.
Again, for the second thing that we're doing here.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna try to do some individual things with them as well. I think the
I
shorter
don't really
videos
feel
will
like that's a good idea.
do what?
I said I don't feel like that's a good idea.
Why not?
I'm just kidding.
No, I don't know. Let's try to do some individual things with them. I like these shorter videos. I think they do better. So we'll see how it goes.
Absolutely.
Over to you.
Well, so we'll get right on into this thing. We are calling this a walk through Genesis. So welcome to a walk through Genesis. Today, we will be tracing Abraham's journey from covenant to sacrifice, from laughter to surrender. So I just want to open with some questions because this is typical of how you ought to study the Bible, is asking questions. So you would typically read. This will be Genesis chapter 15 to chapter 22. As you're reading it, you're going to ask normal questions like, here's one. So why does God make a covenant that seems completely one-sided? We'll talk about that. We're going to talk about why Abraham is so deeply invested in Lot's future. Lot is Lot, in case you're wondering. We also want to talk about who these mysterious visitors are that appear by the Oaks of Mamre. And we'll drop some hint bombs on what happens as far as the birth of Isaac, and there's also another hidden thing in there. I'm not going to give that away just yet, but maybe in the future we will. And then we'll have, why does God ask for the very son that he promised to Abraham? And then finally, this is not just Abraham's walk. This is the story of how faith learns to breathe. Now, Troy has disappeared on us, so I'm just going to go ahead and keep going while he's trying to figure out what exactly he's up to. So, like I said, Genesis 15 to 22, these are the chapters that we're in right now. This is essentially where we're going to pick it up from faith beginning and the promise. So when God tells Abraham to count the stars, he is doing more than promising descendants. He's showing him how faith works. It looks up when logic looks down. God passes alone between divided pieces. So essentially he's cutting animals in half, and there's a fire there, and there's there's fire, smoke, and glory, and Abraham is essentially in a deep sleep. So Abraham never actually moves. So why? Why would a covenant require only one party to walk through it? Well, faith is not earning the promise; it's trusting the one who makes it. And if you want to learn more about faith, the book of Romans is actually a really good place to go. You could also go to Hebrews chapter 11 is the chapter of faith, and there's a lot of Abraham stuff in there as well. So Emunah is what we would call faith in Hebrew. This becomes his participation. God carries the weight of the covenant himself. That's the foundation of grace in Genesis. God binds himself before Abraham ever proves himself. So this is a covenant from God's side. What God is essentially saying is, hey, I know. Okay, hey, welcome back.
It disappeared for a minute. Sorry.
No, you're good.
So you were able to stay here and keep going, because I thought it was you that was away.
No, we're good. So, essentially, what God is doing here is He's making a promise with Abraham that He knows Abraham cannot keep. So, when God passes through, you've got this furnace, and you've got this fire passing through these pieces. In ancient Eastern times, that's kind of how they made covenants. There would be blood there. There would be a trench kind of thing there, and they would walk through and make covenants with each other. So essentially, God understands that Abraham's a man, and not only Abraham, but the people of the nations are men. We sometimes fail, in case you're wondering.
Yeah.
So essentially what happens is God takes it upon himself to make a covenant with man. Abraham is that man. He's that faith man that does what God asks of him. And so because we're looking at this from a God as the creator and the ultimate Like if life is the game of Monopoly, right? God is Parker Brothers, so to
Yeah.
speak. So you have one option. You go around the board until you pass go, and you collect the $200, right? And
Right.
then if you land on chance, you pull a chance card, right? The little hat and little shoe don't get to choose what it is that they're doing in this life. We do what the Creator tells us to. And so Abraham is doing exactly as the Creator's asking him to do. The Creator says, "Hey, go." Abraham goes, right? And that's Lech Lecha. That's what we talked about the last time. So, um, if the promise depends on faith, not control, then what happens when someone tries to control the promise? Well, this leads into the story of Lot. So, Lot is more than Abraham's nephew. He's like a shadow of what Abraham could have been if he chased comfort instead of covenant. So when their herdsmen quarrel, Abraham gives Lot his first choice. Lot looks towards Sodom, the place that looked like the garden of God. It was very luscious and green at the time during the story, and so this is before the destruction of Sodom, and there's essentially a nuclear bomb that goes off, and Sodom
Right.
is never the same. This is why the Dead Sea looks the way that it does nowadays. But anyway, so Lot, on the other hand, chooses to go to a place that looks right. It's a city rich with promise, but it's poor in spirit. And so, faith waits, faith rushes. So essentially, what I really want you to do is kind of look at Lot and Abraham, like this. Lot is the flesh man. Lot is when you're on that level of flesh, when you're kind of just going through the moments. You're focused on career and not really focused on spiritual things. You're focused on what God is, not necessarily what God is doing, but kind of family, and you're maybe the hunter guy. You're out in the forest. You're hunting for things. You're the sports guy. And Abraham, or Abraham, he's a spiritual guy. He's always wondering, what is God up to? What is God's plan in this world? How can I positively affect community? What can I preach? How can I live forward towards covenant in Christ, right? And so
Right.
that's really who Avram is, or Abraham. So sometimes I'll interchange their names, and that's my apology. My brain is trying to sift through a lot of stuff. So then, why would Abraham let Lot choose first if the land was promised to him? Wouldn't that be risky? Well, here's
Very.
the thing. Here's the thing. The essence of covenant is trust without control. So we're trusting God without controlling the outcome of what God is doing. And this is essentially where I'm at in my own life, but I'll digress. Um, Abraham releases his grip and watches Lot grasp. So he knows the promise doesn't come through territory; it comes through trust.
Yes.
And this is kind of Lot's major issue. So the next time we see Lot, Abraham's rushing into battle to rescue him. Why save the guy who walked away, right? Well, um, uh, this would really lead into Abraham's rescue. He meets me with Melchizedek, which is a brief note to the actual story. It's kind of about the giving of tithes and being faithful. Melchizedek is that theophany that we see coming about in the actual story there, and he would represent Christ to Abraham. So we'll fast forward. Abraham sitting at his tent in the heat of the day, and he lifts his eyes and he sees these three men. Now, this is after he kind of initially um, is. I believe this is after he's saving Lot from. Yeah, this is kind of after he saves Lot from his Lot issue there with these four kings. So essentially, these four kings, they go down to the land of Sodom, and they kind of conquer the land of Sodom, right? What happens is, because Lot's down there, Abraham has like an idea that he wants to go after and save Lot, because in Abraham's mind, this is kind of where this rift starts. In Abraham's mind, he doesn't have any children, and so presumptively, and I'm just making an assessment here. I'm not saying this is actual Bible or whatever, right? You can go read the text for yourself and kind of make an assumptive thing. My assumption is that Abraham is essentially seeing Lot as the guy that's going to kind of move his family forward, right? So in the promise of God, because Abraham has no son, he essentially is like, oh yeah, Lot will be the guy, because as we talked about last week, there's this Yebam Levirate marriage that's going on. So Abraham marries Abraham marries Sarai, which is the daughter of Haran and the sister of Lot. And so, because Abraham marries that woman, he then thinks, "Oh, we'll have a child," but they can't have children right now. In fact, they're 70 years old, still haven't had children. So then Abraham is assumptively thinking, "Oh, Lot will be able to take my lineage," and it'll be kind of a reversal of that, where me and Haran will basically come together and together we'll have this lineage through Lot, right?
Right.
But Lot makes some really dumb choices, right? He goes down to Sodom. There's kings fighting, and then Abraham has to go save him. And so the interest of Abraham and Lot is, I still really want this guy. I don't want to just let him go per se, but I want to be able to capture him back. So he does. He frees him, and he's kind of like keeping an eye on him from a distance. Well, this is where Abraham is now sitting at the tent in the heat of the day, right? Because Lot's still down there, and Abraham frees Lot, but then he allows him to stay. But he's still kind of keeping a close eye on him. And so, as he's sitting in this tent, he lifts his eyes and he sees these three men, and he runs to them. He doesn't wait to understand who they are. He simply opens his tent. So hospitality becomes the stage for revelation. Um, so then, who are these men? Are they angels, or is one of them actually the Lord? The Bible isn't really super clear on this. That's more of a mystery. The text never labels them, because the real revelation isn't who visits, but who welcomes. But
Right.
just for context, I would just preface by saying rabbinic commentary or commentary on the scriptures through the rabbinic sages would be that, and of course, take this with a grain of salt. This is it's kind of, again, just commentary. That there are three angels. The three angels' names is Raphael, Gabriel, and Michael. Those three angels
Yes.
are the ones that come to God, or come to, as in the place of God, they come to Avram, and they essentially explain to Avram, "Hey, this is what we're going, Abraham, this is what we're going to go do," and in the midst of that, they also give him this um, thing that's going on. So, it again, the real revelation isn't who visits, but who welcomes. So while Sodom is actually closing its doors to people, Abraham is opening his doors to humanity, and so heaven comes to the place that makes room for it. And again, he's gone. So, as these three guys come, essentially two of them say, "Hey, we're going to go down to Sodom. There's some bad things going on there. We're going to basically drop a nuke on them and destroy them all, because they're not doing the right thing." So then, they also explain to Avram and Sarai that they are going to have a child, and then Sarah makes this comment where she laughs within herself. "I'm so old. How can I have a child?" Well, we'll get to that. So the question, though, is, was the laughter actually a sin, or was it human? Like, was she allowed to do this? Because, like, sometimes the narrative appears as though God's not really happy with the laughter. So it's actually both. Her disbelief, God flips it on her and gives it into a prophecy. The child's name becomes Yitzhak, or in Hebrew it's Yitzhak, but in English it's Isaac. And the meaning of his name is he will laugh. God turns her doubt into joy, and this actually becomes a great thing for Sarah. So even our disbelief can become prophecy in the hands of God. God can literally turn anything that is evil or even used in sinfulness as good. So if laughter can become prophecy, could pain become it too? What happens when God asks for the thing we love the most? And so this kind of leads us into the Akedah. The Akedah is just a simple binding of Isaac. Okay,
Yep.
so um, so years later, the promise has grown up. God says, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love," and the Torah doesn't like to rush. Each phrase pierces deeper, and so part of this Bible study is not necessarily going word for word through the text, but we'll get to these deeper nuances as time goes on. You don't really want everything all at once, because your brain would explode. And so
Right.
each year you get just a little bit, and then the next year you get a little bit more, and then the next year you get a little bit more. There's a whole lot of things going on, especially when God tells Abraham about the prophecy of his family and what's going to happen, and there's all kinds of things that go on. And the the Bible is basically just a bunch of foreshadows and mirrors, right? I would argue that mirrors and foreshadows, in my mind, are the same thing. It's consistently remirroring itself all the way through the narrative. In fact, I'll give you an example. In the beginning of Cain and Abel, now Cain represents the man that is after the flesh. He's not really spirit led man. He's more, he's worried about sports. He's worried about TV. He's worried about, his yard looking nice. He's worried about his job. He's worried about, being the best guy he can ever be. And he's a woodsman. He's always out in the woods hunting. He's a man's man. He's ready. He's hairy. He's the go getter type of guy. And Jacob over here seems almost like he's a mama's boy. He's kind of hanging out in the tents. He's kind of shy, not really wanting to be seen a whole lot, but he's hanging out in the tents. Well, in that time frame, you have to understand that Jacob would have linked his tent up with Abraham's. So Joseph, or sorry, not Joseph. Jacob is essentially the spirit man, where Esau is the flesh man. And so, if you go back one generation to Abraham and Lot, Lot is the guy who is the herdsman. He's the ready guy. He's always looking for the best place. That's why he sees Sodom and he says, "Oh yeah, I'm going to go to Sodom, and that's the place I'll pitch my tent because it's lush and green and it's easy living." Right? It's
Right.
always a grass greener on the other. That's exactly what kind of guy this is. Now, Abraham is waiting on the voice of God. He is the spirit man, while Lot is that flesh man. So you have to ask yourself, which guy am I embodying? Am I embodying the Lot figure, or am I embodying the other guy? And let me switch back there. Same thing with Cain and Abel. Cain is the guy who is essentially the ruddy outdoors guy. He's working with his hands. He's in the field. He's doing the planting, and the spirit man is Abel, and Cain actually kills Abel. And so these are the mirrors that you're beginning to see, right? You're beginning to see Cain and Abel. You begin to see Abraham and Lot. You begin to see, Jacob and Esau, right? And we'll get to Jacob and Esau at a later time. I went to Jacob and Esau, but I meant to do Cain and Abel first. Anyway, so you have Cain and Abel, Abraham and Lot, Jacob and Esau.
Okay.
So there's no rush in the text. There's no rush in the narrative. That's why you want to really slow down. You want to really read these things and really ask these deep, nuanced questions. So why would God ask Abraham to do something that seems to contradict everything he's promised? I mean, you literally have been telling me for years that I'm going to have this great nation come from me, and and first it was going to be Lot, and then now it's Ishmael, and we kind of screwed up there. So now it's going to be Isaac, and like now that the promised child is here, now that the promise is here, now you're asking me to go to this mountain and sacrifice this thing. And Abraham, being the faith man that he is going to obey God because, again, Abraham's little hat, little shoe, he's doing what the Creator asks of him. And Abraham also believes in his heart that God will do a miraculous thing there, and he won't actually have to give his son up. So that's the heart of the test, not to destroy Isaac, but to expose whether Abraham's faith rests in the gift or the giver. So a lot of times we put a lot of emphasis on their gifts that God gives us, but it's not about the gift. It's about the giver of the gift.
Right.
Thank God that God gave us gifts, talents, and things like that, but it's not all about, people, you hear people say, it's my ministry, it's God's ministry. It's not my ministry. The thing is mine. It's God's. And so whether God wants to cultivate that ministry and make it large or make it small, that's a God thing. I'm just having to be the vessel in which God uses for the ministry. So Abraham and his father walk together. And then there's this big question here. There's this big question of, Father, here's the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb? This is the heart of covenant, trust without control. That's really, really what this is. And again, this is kind of Romans chapter 5, 6, 7, and 8. Faith isn't about losing what we love. It's about learning where provision really comes from. So here's our next question. Do you think Isaac knew what was happening? Well, probably, and again, we can get into that more nuanced stuff later because there's a whole thing there. But faith isn't silent submission. It's shared surrender. So then you see this ram. He's tangled in the horns. He's caught and he is the substitute for Isaac. So faith doesn't erase fear. It carries it up the mountain and lets God speak to it. God requires that men climb mountains to talk to them, but I digress. So then, so what does this mountain teach us? That faith means obedience, or that faith means trust, even when we don't understand. So every episode in Abraham's story is a rehearsal for redemption, covenant, separation, laughter, sacrifice. Each one a breath of the same spirit. So in every story in Genesis, there's a breadcrumb trail. You have laughter, you have a ram, you have a cave, you have a promise leading us to the one who would really carry it all, which is Jesus Christ, right?
Yep.
That's a mystery that's worth another walk. And so, real quick, I do want to kind of touch on what Abraham calls on God at the mountain. When Abraham's getting ready to plunge his knife into the sun, and the angel stops him, and then the ram is there in the thicket. And by the way, that ram's horn means a whole lot, because that's the beginning of why in the world would we even use a ram's horn. Well, that's why we use the ram's horn, because the ram was caught in the thicket. But I digress. We can talk about that more later too. Um, so, also, just another quick one that I forgot to mention. Sarah makes cakes in haste. That is another clue to the mind of a first century Galilean person. I'm making cakes in haste. Where have we heard that before? We'll pause there and leave that for another time also. But keep that in mind. Cakes made in haste. That means something significant, okay? Okay, so
Okay.
Abraham's on this mountain. He gets ready to kill Isaac. The knife stops just at the right time. The angel of the Lord grabs his arm. He doesn't actually plunge the knife into Isaac. And then Abraham calls that place Jehovah Jireh. We say Jehovah Jireh in English. I'll give you the Hebrew term. It's Hashem Yirah, or Adonai Yirah.
Okay.
Adonai Yirah means the Lord sees, and then he provides. So for those watching online, you might be thinking, yeah, this is great stuff. This Abraham Isaac thing. It's really cool. But what does this mean for me? Well, it simply means that there's a promise in our lives that God is continuously trying to get us to. He's called you to a promise. He's called you to a very specific thing in your life. And, even both Troy and I, he's called us to a specific thing. But God doesn't just provide that thing. He sees us where we are. And he saw Abraham where he was. When Abraham is asked the question from Isaac, Father, where's the sacrifice? Abraham is super intent to be in that conversation with Isaac, and we can go into the nuance of that later on as well. But he's super intent in that moment, and that really has a very deep connotation with Jesus in the garden. God is sitting in that place of pain that you are feeling in your life. There's something that God is calling you to do, and it just doesn't seem like it's going to happen. It just doesn't seem like it's going to work. But God has a plan. God has a plan. And so in the midst of that, he is sitting there with you. And just like Abraham's listening to Isaac, he's intently understanding. He's not running from Isaac. But what he says is the next line. It really shows the character of the man. He says, God himself will provide a sacrifice. God will see that the sacrifice is needed, and he will meet that. And we can tell that Abraham believes that because it's what he says.
Yes.
So even when we have things in our lives that God has promised us, he is not just the God that provides. He is the God that sees you. He sees you in your place. He sees you in your pain. He sees you in your hurt. He sees you in your depression. He sees you in the darkness. He sees you in your joy. He sees you in your good job. And he will provide for you in due season, in due time. He will provide right at the exact moment that it's needed. And Abraham understood that, and that's why he calls him Jehovah Jireh, essentially.
Yeah.
So, what I'm hinting at is that there is another walk that we will make later. And maybe this is the end. This is just going to wrap up everything. Maybe that's the part of the mystery, because the trail always leads forward. So we're at 25 minutes right now. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being with us. Please, in the comment section, ask some questions. If you have any questions for me, maybe we can get to those questions later. We can definitely go through some of that stuff, hit on more of the Abraham story. Next week, we will talk about Jacob and Esau, which again will kind of touch back on some of the stuff that we've already touched on. But next week will be that Jacob and Esau story, and then moving into the story of Joseph and the brothers and the sale of Joseph and that kind of stuff. So please stick around for that. Come back, and I don't know how many views we're getting right now. Probably 2. But anyway, it would be good for more people to. It would be good for more people to
We
listen.
had a few.
So that'd be awesome. So, like I said, write some comments down, ask some questions. There's nothing wrong with asking questions. You should be able to ask questions, but there's a problem when you put God in question. And we will end there. Thank you for listening. Now we're at 26:38. So we actually are less than I think last week. I think last week we were at 28 minutes.
Right about 28 minutes, which will be probably be there by the time we get all signed off. So, sorry for my technical difficulties, but
It's okay.
glad you guys tuned in. Thanks for watching. Try to be back next week a little bit more. See you guys later.
Peace.